Thank you all for tuning in for another great edition of Freerun Talks. I'm joined by my two bald co-hosts, Mr. Dustin Wilson and Mike Laszlo. And we are also chatting today with the one and only June Rodil from Houston, Texas. And June is a fellow master sommelier. In addition, she is a partner in Goodnight Hospitality, which consists of 4 operations. Correct me if I'm wrong here, June. You have a retail operation, Montrose Wine and Cheese. You have a casual restaurant, Rosie Cannonball. Goodnight Charlie's, a bar and music venue. And then a
March.
soon to open restaurant called March, which is a fine dining restaurant that you were in the process of opening when this all happened. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Anything else I missed?
I'm still a partner at June's All Day in Austin as well, which is a wine bar.
Awesome. So we thought it'd be great to chat with June to hear her perspective from Texas, which is one of the states that has allowed restaurants to reopen. And June will be sharing with her their decision as a company on how to approach that and how they are approaching it in all of their operations as well as moving forward. But first, Mike, you being in Colorado, there's been some conversations about restaurants opening there, whether it's approved by the government or not.
That's right.
Why don't you as a lawyer tell us what your take is on that?
I'm going to give you a couple points on this one. So yeah, over the weekend, we had a restaurant just south of Denver, but still in Denver, open up to the public, despite the order from the governor saying, it's still in effect, saying restaurants are not allowed to be open for dine-in. They did it anyway. Many people probably have seen the post. It went viral. There's video of somebody walking around, and I don't know that I saw one mask, one set of gloves, or any protective equipment on anybody. So it's annoying to see personally, but professionally, I think it's a bad decision. And if a client came to me and said, hey, we're going to stick it to the man and we're going to open, or we just are so desperate, for money, which I totally understand, we're going to open, I would say absolutely not. This is to do so would be operating illegally. Mm-hmm. And you're not thinking, or you're most likely missing what comes along with operating illegally. You may be in violation of any other number of laws that require you to operate legally under your business license, liquor license, and then let's talk about insurance. Could you imagine having somebody slip and fall or get sick on the food you've served while you were operating illegally, make a claim and have the insurance company come back and say, hey, we're going to void all this coverage because you agreed to operate under the laws of the state in which you're in, and you didn't do that, so we're not going to cover you. I think it is just a terrible business decision. I certainly get the frustration and the motivation. I really do understand that, but it's such a bad business decision. We haven't heard any fallout from that yet. I would expect to hear some news today on if there was any action. This is similar to that Texas salon where the lady opened up the salon in violation of the order and they sent her to jail. The Supreme Court of Texas ended up letting her out. I think that was the right decision. I certainly don't think we need to be throwing people in jail for this. I think I think the government would take a stand on the business license or fine them or something else. But I think jail is ridiculous. But don't open. If the order says don't open, you should not be operating illegally anytime. It's bad for business. So that's kind of what's going on as we start to get towards that. We're inching closer to reopening, and I think people are just feeling the itch and just wanting to break free. And I understand it, but be careful. It's interesting. One other point I want to bring up. Last week, a bipartisan bill in the Senate looks like it's going to be try to move forward. And it was Senator Bennett, actually a Colorado Democrat senator, and then Todd Young, a Republican out of Indiana, are doing a bill to help or to try to fix PPP. And I don't want to get into a big PPP discussion today, but it's important to know that it looks like there is some movement there. And this particular bill looks like it would expand the amount of time in which you would have to use the funds. That's the high level, and I think that's the bulk of it. One other point is that Senator Schumer apparently is going to have some type of a virtual town hall or some discussion with, I believe, various restaurant groups. And my understanding is that's at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I've seen a couple different angles of that invite, but I would encourage people to try to listen to that. I'm very interested to hear what he's going to have to say, and hopefully we're going to see some movement on relief for restaurants.
And I have to say, just him acknowledging it or addressing the restaurant community is the first that I've heard of a politician speaking directly to the asks and what is going on in the space. So it'll be very interesting. I know there'll be a lot of people tuning in, hoping to hear not just empathy, but action coming from that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I've heard a lot of empathy, and I've heard other, senators, Congress folks, and leaders speak about the need to help restaurants. But I feel like this has a different feel to it. Like, okay, we've actually
some action here.
Yeah, like something.
Yeah.
And frankly, maybe we're not going to like what we hear, and maybe it's not going to be specific to independent restaurants. But I feel like at this point, anything is some positive move. June, what are you seeing down in Texas? What's going on down there?
Well, I mean, essentially, I think that y'all touched point on this in a previous episode, but obviously everything is befallen on governors, right? And so it very much depends on the type of governor that you have. Ours has elected to not have a state mandate. Really, a lot of things in the beginning were just based on mayoral delegations, county judges, et cetera. And in a way remains so. Like, obviously there was a big one that happened where on the 27th of April, our suggested stay at home was to end on the 30th, and that allowed restaurants in particular to open should they feel the want and need and capacity to at no more than 25% capacity.
That's statewide?
Statewide. Yes, statewide we have that opportunity. It's such a difficult state, right? So, Texas is huge. It's got 4 of the 12 top populated cities in the United States within one state, and then it spans crazy rural areas. So I understand the pressure of a leader having to make a decision, but unfortunately that decision now, because it's individual mayors, individual counties, now it's really befallen on us as small business owners to make the call of to open or to not open. And frankly, like in my opinion, and as well as many, to say that you can open at 25% capacity with the traditional restaurant balance sheet and business plan is saying to stand in front of this train and watch it run over you. Very quickly. It's not viable. It's not tenable. So it's very much like this lifeline or this olive branch that means nothing in very many ways. And then on May 18th, they're allegedly looking into phase 2. So likely sometime this week, there will be a call to really, finalize phase 2, which is 50% capacity. So
now, June, so in New York, for example, they're saying the stay-at-home order has been extended, I believe, till June 6th. And then they said when we start reopening, there's going to be various phases, but the phases are tied to the type of business. In yours, it sounds like they just said any retail can open, or any restaurant and business can open, but at 25%, and then scales up from there. Whereas ours is taking a different approach where there's phases of which businesses, then there'll be phases within each category of how they can open.
Well, there are restrictions on bars at this time. Bars are still not in the mix. However, there's a huge gray area that people are kind of taking advantage of. So if you have a kitchen in a bar that serves food, a lot of people are deciding to pretend that they're a restaurant.
Is it limited to license, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. You do have a license. There's a lot. I mean, just as you were talking about this woman, Shelley Luther, who was a salon owner not going to jail, there hasn't been any solidified penalties or any kind of. There's just been a note from the governor saying we're not really going to jail any violators of this. So it's very much like.
But with restaurants, like you said, like if you have a bar and you have a kitchen and they're kind of sneaking in as a restaurant, I don't know how the Texas liquor licenses are classified, but like here we have a tavern license, which is for bar.
So same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, we do definitely have different occupancy. It has to do with your liquor license.
Okay, gotcha.
And yeah, our Goodnight Charlie is a bar. I mean,
Mhm.
it sells over 51% in alcohol, so that's generally what considers you a bar. And there are many others actually opening.
We had a quick question. I think that real quick, I just want to touch on this just because it's current. Rob Ittner from Aspen asks, what's the legal definition of a bar versus restaurant? Rob, that's what we were just talking about. Here in Colorado, just for our Colorado listeners, we do have a different license here. A tavern license is for a bar, and a hotel restaurant license is a traditional restaurant license that it has a food service requirement that bars don't have. A lot of licenses around the state, for those not in Colorado, around the country, also have that type of a distinction.
Mm-hmm. And June, you've done, over your career, you've worked in Austin and Houston. And as you look at those two, what is the guest response and what is the restaurant community response in those two cities? Are they the same? Are they different? What are you seeing and hearing?
I feel like it's extremely polarizing, and not necessarily by city because they're quite similar in terms of population density. Just Houston's way bigger in a space, but it's quite polarizing because you definitely have guests who are judging you either way, to be open or to not be open. So the day that we opened, the day that we decided not to open, we had people applauding the decision, and then we had people very much questioning and pushing to ask, why the hell can I come in? It's my birthday. Mm-hmm. So it's hard, and in the end, we're in the hospitality industry, so we can't really cast the judgment back to them. There can't be that reflective judgment. We just have to be extremely informed and understand why we're making that decision, and to try to, all we have is our words right now. We don't have face-to-face connection. We have to be able to say these things via email, over the phone. There's a lot more filters involved, social media, things like that. So to try to remain hospitable when you're dealing with something like this grave is really, really difficult. It's gonna change the way I think we're gonna have to speak to guests. We have to be way more careful. In regards to what Mike was saying, like in regards to insurance, we needed to talk to our insurance providers and our brokers, like what's the liability on us? Are those questions right. being asked?
Yeah.
Once we start bringing people in, obviously it's unprecedented, but we still need to do our due diligence and start asking those questions rather than just open the door, say we're wearing masks and have sanitizers everywhere and do a little bit of this. Like that's not enough,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Were they able to give you clarity?
Sorry.
Were they able to give you any clarity when you spoke with your insurance providers about the liability and such?
Right now, what they have said to us is that obviously they're waiting for a clearer picture, but the way that the virus is working is that it's very difficult to have causation, to really pinpoint the origination of it. So sadly, that's horrible. Also on our side, so it's one of those things. Again, we just need to know more, and yet another reason to decide not to open, right? Mm-hmm. So on our, the good part is that there will be a lot of difficulty in really like figuring out exactly if someone was infected in your restaurant at a particular time, et cetera. Looking at what insurance is going to look like in the future is going to be a big thing. Like what are those premiums going to look like? Are we going to see something that's actually going to work more like a blanket or something that's on top, kind of like what is it? Like the terrorist insurance that you.
Oh yeah, the riders and expenses.
Right? Like, do you add that on? And that premium is probably going to be insane. And I know, this is a completely different topic, but But insurance is huge. And, how I was talking with our broker was just super candidly, like there's only $800 million in insurance to be distributed, or 800 billion, something like that. Like how many restaurants are going to need money? How many restaurants is affected? All of it. So are we going to be able to get an insurance claim? Someone's going to set a precedent, and it's probably not going to happen because insurance companies aren't going to be able to function that way.
No, the business interruption insurance group, which is that's the Thomas Keller group for the restaurant side, is that's going to be an interesting thing we're going to watch over the next couple months. It's very difficult to envision how that's not going to affect all restaurants over the next couple of years, even before the litigation's resolved. And, something we were talking about just a few minutes before we got on was, if you're opening a new restaurant right now, or let's say you were going to open February 1 or March 1, and you had an insurance policy in place,
right?
Now you've been pushed to pause. Yeah, like you. And you're going to open in August. Do you go back to the insurance company and say, the world's changed, we need a different policy? Or does the insurance company come to you and say, hey, we wrote this policy in a pre-COVID world, we can't insure you? Yeah, I mean, those are things that just are very scary.
I have heard that there are insurance companies that are pausing new restaurants. Not that there are many new restaurants that are actually being made, but not intaking any new policies for restaurants. So you have to have almost like a line of credit or a history with that insurance company to continue on your policy. So we're very lucky that we already had that, but that is the case for some. And I mean, even if you're moneyed, if you're funded, that's another hoop to get through, just because of timing and the way.
So what is currently in your world, what is currently open, and what are the decisions that you've made with your businesses?
So we've chosen not to allow any dine-in, including our retail shop. Our retail shop is extremely tiny. It's 800 square feet. To be at 25% capacity is to have like one person in. It's pointless. And it's also for the safety of our team. One of the biggest things is there were 4 days between the governor saying that businesses could open at 25% capacity to the date that we could open, which was May 1st. We do not feel that that was enough time. We didn't feel that it was the time, period. Within the week and a half that this has happened, we've now seen the highest amount of cases within the last week. The forecast, from science has been increased in terms of deaths and, of course, confirmed cases. One big positive, I will say, which I've seen in Houston, is that testing seems to be more available, which is good, even asymptomatic testing. So that is one positive that I've seen. We've had people, just for their sake of mental health, like gone in to do a drive up and get tested, even if they were asymptomatic. So that's been great. But aside from that, the numbers are the numbers. And so we kind of had a feeling that was going to happen anyway. And so we chose not to allow any dine-ins because we needed the time to ensure a safety protocol for our team and also for them to establish those habits. If you've been at home not wearing a mask, like that's great, you're safe. But to start becoming habitual in sanitation and washing your hands and ensuring the mask is on at all times unless you're eating or drinking, and making sure that the distance between you and another person, if you haven't seen another person for 6 weeks, like that's not going to happen in 4 days.
Yeah.
And we have 3 in one building.
So how have you pivoted those businesses since you're not allowing anybody in at the moment? Have you gone deep into delivery, to go, take away, that kind of thing? Are you still doing delivery on your retail side? Tell us what you're up to.
Yes, so we are doing curbside and delivery for both retail and for our casual dining restaurant. We actually closed our casual dining restaurant completely as we felt that the virus was peaking. There was just, again, we have 3 locations in one building. There's no way to limit that to 10 people and to function properly at the quality level that we wanted. So that was just the best decision that we were able to make at the time, and are still happy with that decision. So as restrictions started to ease, we decided to develop and create our protocol for safety and to ensure that we could do it with our people before we started allowing diners in. So retail has been very good. I think that, those numbers have been great countrywide, nationwide. We were only open for retail 1 day a week. We really wanted to give our staff just the ability to get through this crisis, just mentally, emotionally. We felt that, to say, we're going to do it, we're going to go balls to the wall, we're going to do retail all the time. People want their booze, everybody needs to drink. I mean, I'm happy about that, but we just couldn't do that to our team. So
what was your team's response to it as you went through all this?
They were, I mean, I think, again, you got to be informed and informative. So we had to be extremely clear what we were doing. We were very, very lucky. I know that very few have had a situation where we were a bit more on top of this, like due to, honestly, friends like y'all in other markets where it was really touching your front steps prior to the Texas markets. So knowing that it was on its way, we really already decided that that's what we were going to do once it reached us. So we had emails drafted. We had decided on a PTO plan for our team during the time that we had full closures, and then would meet or talk on the regular regarding what our plans would be for a slow reopening. We always knew it was going to be slow. And we always knew that there was a possibility that if we reopened, we would close again. We'd rather just slowly reopen than, because to close again would be chopping us off at the knees.
Oh, right.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's it. So now retail is open 4 days a week, limited hours, 12 to 6. Curbside has just reopened starting the 5th of May. Tuesday through Saturday, 5 to 9 p.m. That is it. The bar, no end in sight. We really, I mean, a bar is a bar. The vocabulary of a bar is to be on top of someone and have a wonderful time and to squeeze your way to get a drink. Like it's gonna be a long decision on how to reemerge or how to reutilize the space until it's time for it to become what it once was. And then for March, we continue training. We train with Zoom.
March is the restaurant that you're in the process of opening that's been put on pause.
Yeah, it's a fine dining restaurant, so the training process was going to be lengthy anyway. So we've had the opportunity to continue our training online. So extensive wine training for the front of house, and then the back of house has pivoted to do community projects. So I mean, we're trying to stay busy. We need to keep our people busy, not too busy, right? Like to still be able to function and figure out how to pivot their personal lives because it's looking crazy. And so the retail has been very good. We've established webinars and tastings for people who are really itching to have a connection but still want to stay at home. And yeah, there's obviously judgment for not being able to allow dine-in, but it's not the
So have a lot of restaurants opened though, opened their doors?
Yep, absolutely. They sure have.
What are you seeing in terms of the number of people that are visiting them and how the restaurants are responding operationally?
Mixed, very mixed, from one end of the spectrum to another. So I went and got breakfast tacos for my team on Saturday at a mom and pop shop down the street, and they were fabulous. There was specific places where you would park, specific to go, and then specific to dine in. And they definitely had a system. Everybody had masks. There was, like Sandy pumps everywhere. And I mean, I looked at their capacity. I purposely looked. Their capacity was 50 people, which means they could have 12.5 people in the restaurant at the time. And there was 10 people. It was great. At the peak of their service, which is for breakfast tacos. So they're extremely kind. You left with the pin that you came in, like super thoughtful and definitely analog, right? Like they don't have a marketing system behind them. They haven't done online orders. You had to call it in, all of that stuff. So they were doing the best that they can. Extremely well done. At the same time, I still felt a little bit uncomfortable because it was still a small spot. Then there are restaurants that I have driven by where people are just congregating very close to each other. There are restaurants where I've heard that people are 4 deep behind a bar, trying to get a drink. So it's a big question mark, right?
I mean, watching it from afar, we're fascinated too, because we're not anywhere near in New York approaching the decision of to open or not to open, but looking at how guests are responding to it, how people are enforcing it, both on the operator side, but also on the police or Department of Health, whoever's left to enforce that, how they're handling that. And I know, seeing there was the Hillstone article that came out and saying that, they're having their team work, but without masks. And if you wanted to wear a mask, you couldn't work. When we're right at the epicenter, it seems very ridiculous, but it also says something about where the mindset of the guests are in that market, which is pretty interesting. And then the Mark Cuban study that he commissioned this past weekend, where for those that didn't see it, he hired a firm to shop 1,000 businesses. He called 1,000, and then they did physical audits of 300 businesses, everything from retail furniture stores to restaurants, and found that only 36%, I think, chose to be open on the first weekend. And when they looked at it, it said, I think, about 58% of the mandatory and suggested protocols were actually being applied in those restaurants. And for the most part, people weren't conforming with it. And that's pretty shocking from our standpoint when we're still on lockdown and knowing how this can spread, that just because it's lifted doesn't mean, okay, everybody's safe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when you looked at what happened in Colorado, again, if you see that video, it was absolute business as normal back. If that was from January, we would all have said, oh, it's just normal Mother's Day at a diner. I mean, it was that normal. And so part of that too, I look at is customers wanted that. There was a line out the door. So there is pent up demand for, which is shocking, frankly. I think you would wear a mask in this situation, but they filled the place up. All those people knew it was illegal. They did it anyway.
I also think that there are people that, and there was a quote in that article by somebody that says, I don't feel safe going there. And that is, there's going to be people in both camps. Yeah. And in my mind, it's play the long game, be safe for people to go there. Those are the type of folks that will understand what you're trying to do for your teams. Your teams will appreciate it. And that's the long game. Because all it takes is, you mentioned about the insurance, and yes, it's, what happens if somebody gets infected and you can't really trace it. We talked about that now, but all it takes is somebody on Yelp saying, oh, I think I might have gotten this there. And we've all had that on the food safety side, but that's going to just be a whole nother can of worms. And nobody wants to be, oh, this is the hot spot, the next hot spot where it came. And
June mentioned it. You mentioned the word that is the premise of my entire career is causation. I mean, that's what lawyers do. How do you prove causation? That's the key to any, to proving any type of a tort. And when you have one restaurant in Denver that opens to in-person dining, I think you're going to be a little closer to causation if somebody's sick, because it's not like they got it at the other restaurant or they got it at the cottage.
There's this a meat company in the Panhandle, and it's my favorite, the Panhandle.
The diagram.
And very rural, and it is the highest density population of cases because of this one meatpacking company that refuses to close and is forcing their people to, work and to continue to have a job. And it's really, really interesting. Like, you're absolutely right. But if you're in a high density populated area like Houston, Texas, Denver, all of that stuff, there's just no way. There's no way.
We talked,
but also all it takes is a PR disaster to close things down. It doesn't even need to be a legal thing or a causation thing. If Eater or some other publication picks up on, court of public opinion, if they've decided that your restaurant has become a hotspot, your business is going to tank.
And also, I look at it from we're behind everyone in terms of the opening, but in Seoul, Korea, they opened the bars, and then they did the study where there's not a study, but they found out that one gentleman went to 5 bars in one night, and he came into contact with, they estimated, about 1,500 people. And as of this weekend, there were 40 people that had been infected as a result of that. And now they're closing down bars for another 30 days. And so my fear is that somebody, whether it's the restaurant in Denver or in Colorado, or if it's in any of these cities that are opening early, if this becomes the next hotbed, the stigma is around all restaurants and all bars, and we all suffer as a result of that. Yeah. And it's, we're all in this hardship and having to pay rent and figure out how to survive as businesses. But again, it's the long game that I think is what's really important here.
Well, that's the thing too, right? Is it takes the symptoms don't show up right away, right? So maybe everything feels okay for right now as things immediately start to reopen. But what's going to be telling is what happens in the next week or two. We'll see the
You go to a
uptick in
restaurant
cases.
one day, nothing happened.
Yeah.
So you go the next day.
So
and
you feel comfortable now, but what happens in a week or two, I think is going to be really telling for how this plays out.
To Sabra's point of like one restaurant ruining it for everybody else, my kid comes home from kindergarten and says, so-and-so was mean, so none of us got to go to recess. And that's going to happen here because we have one restaurant that can't follow the rules. What do you think is going to happen when we open a couple 100,000 restaurants and say, go to 25% capacity? You're not going to follow those rules. It's all of a sudden you're going to say, well, maybe we're just going to have to push all restaurants to phase 3 because we realize no one's paying attention to these rules and we need to take action. It's making it worse.
Well, there's no penalties for these rules either, right? There's no actual penalty.
Well, no, and that's what I'm saying. Like you need to put some.
Well, I think what may end up happening is you may, at least from a business standpoint, from a restaurateur standpoint, you may want to expect there's the possibility of another shutdown, a couple months from now, or maybe even just a month or two from now. We'll see what happens. But, if it gets to the point where the uptick happens fast enough or grows to be big enough, government's going to step in again.
And somebody mentioned to me yesterday when I was having a discussion about the Colorado restaurant and insurance issues, this idea that, well, all these orders are unconstitutional anyway, therefore I'm going to open, and even if my license is dinged or, I have to fight this insurance battle, it's unconstitutional, I'll ultimately win. That might be right. Maybe it is unconstitutional. And maybe in 5 years, we'll figure out that it's unconstitutional. But that whole mess of argument, to me, is horrible for business. If I'm a business owner, I'm saying, do I want to pay some constitutional lawyer to argue for me over the next 5 years whether or not me opening 2 weeks early was legal? I'm out of business in legal fees. I'm happy about that, but it's a terrible business decision.
Not to mention the court of public opinion.
Yes.
Well,
you know what? Half will appreciate what you did, and half will hate what you did.
Yeah, and half might die.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you have no guests to come in your business. So,
Sobs keeps saying like, "Oh, we're behind." Like, I didn't want to be first. Like, I didn't want to be like first in this race to open.
Nobody wants to.
I don't think anybody wants to be first. Nobody wants to be first. It does not benefit you to be first. I mean, wait, see what other people are doing, see how the public reacts, see what happens, and take your time. I think if you're in the position to be able to take your time, it's beneficial to do so.
I think
there's so many people who don't have time, right? And I think that's a big thing to say is like the understanding of the desperation of having to open is clear. Like there's things that need to be done. That's kind of the foundation of the problem right now, is that people are desperate to open because it's their livelihoods. And how do we fix that? So people are making not the best decisions for the long term because they can't see any kind of end game whatsoever. And I don't begrudge them the decision that they have, like to open. It sucks. It totally sucks. And it's befallen us. Like, it's literally just like, do you want to survive? Like, I mean, this sucks to say, like, there's bleeders and there's survivors, right? So they're dependent on the decisions that you make. Like, you may think you're a survivor and all of a sudden you're bleeding out because you made a bad decision one day. And we're taking things one day at a time because this is literally something that we were not trained to do. So it's based on
that point, we just had a great comment from Jill up in Aspen. People are forcing themselves to open because of the PPP timeframe. And I couldn't agree more. It sucks. And that's why we are extremely hopeful that there'll be some extension or, fix to that. But yeah, you can't hope. You have to make business decisions, and PPP is going to run out for a lot of people soon. Another person commented that they're in the third payroll under PPP. They're going to be about done soon. It's terrible, but that is the situation, and you have to make the best business decision for your business and respecting the safety of your employees as well.
Yeah. So June, I want to pivot the conversation a little bit, and I'd love to chat a little about service. And thinking about going into service when we're returning to this landscape, how are you looking at beverage service and hospitality in your restaurants, or how should other restaurateurs be thinking about this as we do start to reopen our doors? Me personally, I think about all the handling of things, you know, in the restaurant setting, whether it's plates, you know, as a sommelier, it's when I'm opening a bottle of wine, my hands are touching the bottle or the wine key. And, you know, there's a lot of possibilities of passing things along. How are you thinking about that currently, and maybe thinking about adjusting your service standards or how you provide hospitality to your guests?
I mean, so first and foremost, the hospitality aspect is through any means of communication right now, you have to take it to a different level than what you had before because you don't have the connection with the guest. So how are you going to establish the connection with the guest? So we kind of started a different tier with the March team, which is our high-end restaurant that we were training for, kind of a high-touch concierge program for beverage. So right now, since there's so much to go, retail, curbside, and delivery, there isn't that conversation that you're having table side. So we have the ability to do like a phone assom, or we've also created an email for all of them to be able to answer to any guest questions. And when you think about it, whenever you are doing service at a restaurant, much of the conversation doesn't have to deal with a bottle of wine that's in hand. It's about comparisons of what they may have in their cellar, what they've had the week before, et cetera. And that connection is what's going to lead to the opportunity to create another connection to make a sale. So that's kind of the first thing that we've kind of just like really been focusing on staff-wise, is how to create hospitality when you don't have the connection that you normally have with guests. So first and foremost, it's being informative and taking it to the next level in a new way that we can. Second, for like in-room dining or in-dining experiences, things that we've talked about, we actually kind of were joking around this with high-end restaurants. Like I just remember like dining at like Yves Savoy and everybody had gloves on, you know? So it's like, okay, we're gonna just take everything to this fine dining, you know, nth degree. Like,
yeah, the cloche and yeah.
Yes, we're just gonna have cloches everywhere, and you know, definitely be gloved, and honestly give people opportunity to have like a higher experience. You're going to have more space. So you're going to have like the ability to have almost like a Garradon space next to another guest. So it almost kind of befits like a service station for you to be able to have an empty table next to guests as well. So being able to do that service in almost like an exam setting, quite frankly, in a casual restaurant. Other thoughts that I've had are for to-go, people are really kind of leaning into cocktail kits at home. So bringing in kind of a bottle service presentation for dine-in as well is kind of a way to ease the pain of like seeing people create a drink that's really intricate. We've created, our bar manager is great, so he's kind of translated all of our drinks into to-go kits. So then when we start bringing in dining restaurant or in dining, good Lord, I can't talk, dine-ins, we can do like a bottle service. So again, it's kind of utilizing the extra space that we normally wouldn't have to create an elevated idea of hospitality by maintaining better social distancing. I mean, those are just thoughts. Like, again, we had 4 days to open, wasn't going to do it. I need like 2 weeks to figure all of this out. And to get
like bartenders and shaker, great. I need a martini shaken, and I want that vodka. What do you do with gloves? What don't you? How changing the gloves? How do you?
Yeah, you have to change gloves. So gloves are one and done, right? Like otherwise, you're really passing things along. So I mean, that's another cost. Like that you need to really pin down is what your PPE cost is going to be per restaurant, per service, et cetera. So we increased our level of gloves for to go, and now we have to calculate what that would be once we had 25%, 50%, 75%, et cetera. But if you're going to do shaken cocktails, you're going to have to replace your glove every time.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking about like the danger of like, you've got these gloves and then you have to shake it because of the missile.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And so, I mean, they need to practice, frankly. Like that's another opportunity for us while we're waiting for people to start coming into the restaurant, for us to practice what that protocol is. We really need to do like a retraining process of having, I mean, Sob's had a really great idea of almost like showing a video to our guests on social media about what that experience would look like. So the expectation is already there. You're already showing like, I'm going to open the door for you. And then you walk in, and then I will sanitize the handle. And then you walk in and you stand here where this X is, but you don't stand anywhere else. So people like to know that they're doing things right. They hate.
Yeah, I think that guest communication is going to be such an important piece of all of this as people reopen, right? Like all of your systems and processes, and also what the guest is going to expect from an experience standpoint, to know to know how to operate in this new environment, because it's going to be weird for the guests coming in if they're not sure what to do, right? You kind of got to walk them through it. And B, to reassure them that what you're doing on your end is in their best interest, and it's going to make them safer and feel more comfortable at the end of the day. So it's totally different mindset for everybody. It's going to take a lot of communicating, a lot of showing them, right, what's going on.
Yeah,
Justin, you and I.
Okay.
I'm sorry. We had that article we were passing around this weekend about the Cape Cod ice cream shop that opened up for ice cream, and the customers were, from the reports, were terribly rude. Just could not wait for their ice cream. Did not want to follow the protocols. Some of the guests were nice. Some were very angry, and one of the teenager employees, like, just quit, couldn't take it anymore. And yeah, how do you effectively communicate to guests, this is how we're going to do it, and you got to play ball, because otherwise we just got to close the doors, which was what that guy did.
Something that you mentioned, Mike, made me think, and ties back to what June was saying. So ice cream shops, I remember as a kid, I'd love to go into Baskin Robbins and I'd say, I'd like to taste this flavor of ice cream. 28 flavors later, I'd tasted my way through the whole Baskin Robbins buffet and said, yes, I'll have a cone of vanilla, please. But what on the cocktail side, when you make a cocktail, oftentimes bartenders will sometimes put their tasting straw in there and taste it.
Oh yeah, that's gone. That practice is gone.
Right. The plastic straw is back, but you can't use it to taste the cocktail.
but those are the type of things that I'm just trying to get my head around of operationally. What do we have to do differently? I
would almost think, like, in a new bar atmosphere, you kind of want to pre-batch as much as you possibly can, right?
Yeah.
Do that ahead of time. In every state. You're not allowed doing that in every state.
That's true.
That's true.
I mean, look, you're not allowed to open your restaurant, so just batch. I don't know.
No, I'm just saying, like, we have to think outside the box, and hopefully that's a way in those places where you can't, maybe there is a case to be said on why you need to be able to do that from a safety standpoint, from a health and safety standpoint.
But then how do you sell it to me as sitting at a bar paying $18 for a craft cocktail? It's like, let me just go get this jar. I pre-made your cocktail.
Reduce the chances that you're going to have to go to the hospital after this meal.
Okay, deal. I'm 19.
It can be like a cooking show where they're making it in front of you, but they actually have it.
They just pull it up.
I just think the options for cocktails are just going to have to be a lot more limited. Try to pre-batch as much as possible, right? The less bottles that you're touching and the less things that you're handling, the better in this environment, right? So, I think guests are going to have to get used to more limited selections.
We just think
bartenders are probably going to.
Yeah. Pouring wine by the glass. If you pour it at the bar, maybe you just have one bartender who's touching those bottles because they're working point. If you're pouring it at the table, how many hands are actually touching that bottle? As you think about the cross-contamination of that. Yeah. And so how do you look at your operation through that lens of saying, okay, we have to pour everything here. You're focused on the bottles, and then we're going to, disinfect those, every half hour.
Right. Do we do a wipe, do one thing and then let them pour the rest of the bottle? Like, yeah.
Yeah, the passing off of things, whether it's a bottle or it's a plate or what have you. I mean, there's so much of that in a restaurant setting, right? You really got to start thinking through every little moment that there could be a transmission of this thing, right? Like, even walking up to service bar, if I'm the server and I just want to move some stuff out of the way because I'm trying to grab my drinks, right? What happens if you grab that bottle that's sitting there, move it so you can go get your drinks? That's another hand that's touched it, right? Then the bartender touches it. Then maybe the server touches it that's taking it to the table. There's so many opportunities for that to happen. It's going to be tough to get control over it.
Yeah, and Jill just made a great comment real quick. She said, no more topping off wine at the bar, as you're just, it's just little things that consumers come to expect. And it's that value proposition. As we sit there, we expect to have certain things. And how are you going to show me that it's going to be different, but the value is still going to be there?
In the staff training you mentioned, these are all things that you're thinking about as an operator, but the person that's been sitting at home for the past month or 2 months probably isn't in their mind. So if I'm used to going to the table to pour water and I grab the glass, I pick it up and I pour it over the floor, that doesn't fly anymore. I don't want your hands near my glass. Straws probably make it safer now. Like, it's way I can, whereas before we were trying to move away from those. How do you, as a wine professional, how do you handle wine service, proper wine service of a bottle and decanting in this world in your mind, if you walk through that?
I mean, there's definitely like one set of gloves for one customer, in my opinion, when you hand it off. And quite frankly, like, you have a workforce, you should utilize them. Obviously, your bottom line is very, very slim already. So there are definite variables behind overusing your labor, but use your labor to the ability to where you can provide this hospitality. So it would probably be me going down to the cellar, getting the bottle of wine, being gloved, presenting it, and then you can do one of either two things, right? You can ensure that you are the only person that's pouring for the guest and nothing touches them, and the only thing that they're touching is their glass, right? And then you have kind of that table situation that I was talking about that's next to their table, since you're going to need the social distance. Or you open it, you pour it, and you leave them alone and tell them that it's up to them, right? That they're left to their own devices.
Mm-hmm.
And in some states, you can't pour your own wine. You're not allowed to touch the bottle. So you leave it on the table. I mean, these are the little things that are just
Dustin and I went down a rabbit hole the other day of saying, okay, you have the capsule, you take it off. Well, now do you take the entire do you take the
take the foil off, the horrible service, ripping the foil off?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Probably.
Those are the things that we take for granted. Oh, that's just how we do it. But I think it's really important to walk through every step of the guest experience and all your service standards, your SOPs that you train on, in saying, what is the safest thing to do? And then also, how does this look in the perception of the guests? Because ultimately, they're the ones that you need to make feel safe, that you've taken all the precautions going through it. And
it's going to take time. You're going to have to run through drills and continually question and ask and ensure that you're doing everything that you can. And it's never going to be right. Like, once you do finally start doing it and allowing diners in, you're going to have missed something. But, you know, essentially what you're doing is you're training to open a new restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea that maybe if you're doing the tableside service, you're saying, hey, I'm going to be opening the bottle this way, and here's why I'm doing it. We find that removing the entire foil will eliminate this, or we find that doing this will do that. So here's why I'm doing it. And just, it might take you longer, but to follow these protocols. But now I'm just going to talk through it. And you've got the attention of the table, and whether we like it or not, maybe we can have an argument about it, but we're engaged, and we know that you're thinking and you're thoughtful about us, the consumer, sitting there. I think that could be an opportunity.
And you're going to have the time, because you're not going to have that many tables.
Exactly. You've got plenty of time.
In my mind, though, this is just another reason to wait and see what other people are doing, and more importantly, how the guests are reacting. Right? Like, you don't know. Some of the guests might take all of these extra safety precautions, and it might freak them out a little bit. It might scare them if, like, you're going through all of this to, you know, serve a bottle of wine to them. They maybe just want to be in an environment where things feel somewhat normal again. You know,
that's what restaurants are. It's an escape.
And then you're gonna have the next guest sitting right next to them that's like, I saw you touch that bottle, and then you touched that bottle without changing your gloves. Oh my God, you know? So I think it's going to really depend on how everybody's reacting to this, what people care about, what they don't. And there's no way for us to know until you just start to see what's happening out there in real time. So
the fact that
if you can wait, I think it's important to wait and just observe.
When you talk about just like hospitality and guests and resolving guest issues, imagine the person that is making that complaint or that observation from a good place. Maybe they lost somebody to the virus. And so they are saying, I'm concerned about that. And I've seen the dark side of what this can do. So you really need to speak with your team and make sure they understand this. So that's like the whole spectrum of ways that we need to read language, how you engage with the guest that brings that to your attention. And if your team members flippant about it and just kind of brushes it off without that level of taking it seriously, what does that say about the restaurant? And I think that's
I mean, this scares me quite a bit, because think about, you know, all the Yelp reviews that are out there in the world and how much we love them already, right? In the old version of restaurants, you know, think about the potential feedback that they can give nowadays after this. You know, they can write all kinds of things that would have been unheard of 3 months ago. And, you know, this goes back to that PR firestorm again, right? Like, what happens if enough people are saying bad things about your restaurant, or enough guests who who are maybe just a little insecure about the whole thing are writing enough of this, somebody picks up on it, publicizes it. I mean, it could be a potential disaster.
Yeah.
June,
You can't control them.
so you were in the process of opening a restaurant called March, which was a fine dining restaurant. So 2 questions. Are you going to change the name based on the month it actually opens? And secondly,
I like restaurants based on months, like June,
Okay.
March.
June, March, yeah. I'm starting to put it all together there. Makes sense. So you're just hoping for another June baby here with this one.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with that, as you look at the operations are you staying the course and sticking to the initial concept? Because this is something that hasn't been introduced to the public. You haven't had to say, oh, well, here's how we need to adapt this. So you have a blank slate. How are you approaching that?
I think to approach it with what you felt it was going to be in the first place is absolutely wrong. It's just, I mean, the world isn't the same, and you've got to ask the world what it needs right now too. So, we're definitely rediscussing timeline. Like, we have worked so hard for this concept and have such amazing people, and people have moved to the state to work here. So we definitely want to honor it, but that timeline may be extended until we feel like it's a better time to do that. But in the meantime, we have such talent that I know that the word has been used so much, but we'll pivot. Like that's who we are, right? That's what the hospitality industry is. You read someone, you change the way you present something because someone read it a different way. Like, we've got to be able to do that on a larger scale. And there's just other things that are needed right now. And it's that balance of what do our employees need? Because that is, to us, like, our employees define who we are. And if we continue to be informative, to continue to tell them, like, this is what we're thinking, things can change. Obviously, the world is changing. Stick with us, we'll stick with you. That tactic has worked really well. Like, and to show that you can be vulnerable with your employees during this time, I think is very important as well. Like, to pretend like everything is going to be okay is, no one's going to believe that right now. So you've got to be as genuine with them as you want them to be with guests. And I think that that's kind of the way to go about it. I mean, right now, our focus is obviously, like, on an operational standpoint, our focus is on the things that can operate. And so we already have a system that we've started and starting to evolve. Every week we evolve a little bit more. We added provisions boxes, and with those provisions boxes, there's a donation box that goes to someone in the community in need. And now that system has kind of blown up to its capacity. So now what's the next community outreach that we can do? Because we know that people want community outreach. And then what's the next step to normalcy that we can do? Because we know that people want a step towards normalcy. So we're trying to do a little bit of both each week, just small steps with each concept. So for something that wasn't yet opened, those small steps are the conversation to continue to educate our team on things that they love. So our chefs are going out to local farms to learn about the local produce, and then bringing them in for our provisions boxes. It's not a lot, but they're learning more about the seasonality, things like that, and they're doing something that allows them hours and to do something good with the community. And then our front of house team is doing a lot of stay-at-home webinars and tastings with our beverage director, Mark Sayer. And then he's looping in, like, our wineries, because they would normally be traveling on their circuit right now, selling to restaurants. So this is the new way that wineries are evolving to really connect with people who would be selling the wines. So things like that. I mean, we've just got to constantly ask, like, what else can we be doing? And not just looking and replicating something that someone else said. You also have to ask your community. Like, this one woman, we have a wine club at Montrose Cheese and Wine, our retail shop. And
I think it's a really an amazing time and an opportunity to fortify your culture with your team, because they're looking at how you handle yourself in this challenging situation and with your guests. So I love how you're making the most of it in this, and I'm sure that there are going to be some amazing opportunities that come out of it, as well as what your team sees in you and what you learn about them and what they're able to do. So, Mike, you got some questions?
Yeah, and one perfect segue here from Audrey Frick concerning the guest experience perspective. What challenges have you faced as you convert to an in-home to-go operation?
So I think the biggest challenge is making sure that your online platform, if you're able to do that, is as friendly as possible. And unfortunately, I mean, we're not equipped, like we're independent, right? We're not a big company that already had one. So we had to figure it out on the go, and to constantly like look through it as if you're a guest, because again, that's your connection with them. That has been the biggest and most helpful thing, is that we were able to really integrate that very quickly and in a user-friendly way. So contactless payment, pictures up, descriptions of everything, so that people really see what they're going to receive, which is hard for mom and pop operations, right? And I could not have done that without my business partner, our chef, Felipe. He put all the recipes up, took pictures of everything with our managers. And so that's really, really important, because now you don't have anyone you can't talk to them about it.
And what's the platform that you went with?
We went with Toast. They've been fabulous. It's definitely user-friendly. There's others that are involved. I mean, having one where you can put in information of what kind of car you have is awesome too. So there's that extra level of hospitality, right? Like you choose your time, you put in your car, make and model. And so by the time you get there, there's someone like you or June in black car. It's great. So I think that's been challenging, but also a big success. And if you can do that, like get someone who knows computers, because that's going to be your best friend.
Yeah. That goes to what we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. For those who need to find a way to make themselves indispensable to a business, if you know how to program, if you know how to do these types of things, jump in there and offer. Next question: New Orleans introduced the idea of tracking guests who enter the business in order to later do contact tracing. Have you heard of any other states introducing this idea? It would definitely be a huge burden on businesses. I haven't heard of anything, but
I think I've heard a lot of pushback just in terms of personal data, and especially in New Orleans. I don't know if everyone in New Orleans wants everyone to know where they've been while they've been in New Orleans.
Just in Vegas.
Yeah. So I think the data and privacy concerns, I know Apple and Google are working on applications for that, whether it's for applications outside of the US or in the US, I'm not sure. But the data privacy is a huge issue on that. Korea, one of my former colleagues from USHG is from Korea, and he had to go home and he had to do a self-quarantine. And there was an app that he had on his phone. He had to do a check-in, and they sent him all these provisions for his quarantine. And then when you go out and you have to scan an app or a QR code on the window before you go in, and it tells if you are red, yellow, green in terms of the amount of risk that you have. Supposedly the data only lasts for 14 days, whether that's true or not. I'm sure you'll have conspiracy theorists that say it lives out there forever, but it gets a little big brotherish. But to that case in point, in Korea, in Seoul, for those 1,500 people that gentleman came into contact with, how do you notify them that they could be at risk, and how do you prevent them from continuing to spread that?
June, here's a question for you. Curious if they are considering repurposing their huge space at Goodnight Charlie's, the bar, to service customers more comfortably at the restaurant and retail shop, at least temporarily.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. I mean, everything is on the table, from having it as a commissary kitchen, right? I honestly feel that like small catering in someone's house is going to be way more beneficial, because, right now, if you do have a restaurant and you are open, you can only have 6 people. That's the maximum number of reservations. I almost feel more comfortable saying, let's open up commissary and catering for smaller parties, because then you're not circulating guests. It's the same 12 guests the entire time, so there's something to be said about that. So we've talked about commissary kitchen. We're using it for community outreach every week for our donation boxes. That's where we process everything, and where farmers come. I always joke that would be a really perfect karaoke bar, because then you can just rent a booth and there's like 6 feet apart, and we can pretend like we're in Korea. So the world is our oyster. I mean, in the most positive way possible, to figure out what to do with the space, because it is a very beautiful space. And we can provide that level of comfort for people to be farther away.
We're coming up on about an hour. So I'll take one more question. And this is from Rockefeller, who says, asks, what is the future for wild game meats in restaurants? I could say that I don't know.
I don't know. I'm going to say this. I'm going to feel safer with wild game meats because they haven't been processed through a huge plant. Like all of our, I mean, right now, on a personal basis, maybe I'm a bit too neurotic, have your opinions, but I'm just purchasing our meats through our farmers because of things that I keep reading, and that's where our product comes from our restaurants. There's fewer employees that are processing it. So there might be a resurgence in eating boar.
And hopefully I can help the local farmers in this, that's one of the positive outcomes that say this is more sustainable, especially for our community, if we're actually
safer
them, and we know that it's smaller and it's safer.
I was speaking with someone who is in the pork business and was telling me it's frankly sad and disturbing, but that most of the meat plants right now, the packers are closed down due to COVID. And so the plants are just euthanizing animals at an alarming rate, just because there's no way to process them in any way. And so that's really causing the lack of availability of meat. So maybe there is going to be quite a market for wild game. Thanks everyone for your questions. Let's move to what we call the Freerun freestyle. And Dustin, why don't you start us off?
June, we're going to ask you a question.
Oh, yeah, these are questions we have for you.
Are we going to wrap? What's going on? Okay.
Yeah, this is our Freerun freestyle. So June, what restaurant are you most looking forward to visiting once all this is over? And can't be one of your own.
Oh, it's gonna be a sushi restaurant. It's probably Uchi. If I were in New York, it'd be Shuko. Something like, there's all this hand touching with sushi restaurants, and like I crave it so much, and I worry about the future of that. So it's gonna be that for sure, with the perfect.
Love it.
I like it.
And if you were to open a brand new restaurant from scratch that was going to just slay it in this new normal, what type of concept would it be? Would it be your karaoke bar with sushi?
No, actually, I have two. I have two that I've been thinking about. Okay, just because this is what I do at night. So there's this little restaurant that's kind of down the street. I don't know how they've been open. I mean, pre-COVID, and I was like, I really want that to be a za and gelato to go only. That's it. Pizzas and gelato to go. That's all I need in life to survive, carbs and sugar. And that's all. But really, I was thinking about that because I love fine dining. But if we had like fine dining where we had like cubicles that were completely encased, and then the chefs would come to you like a little trolley and make it almost like coat, but you feel really secure in your little
It's
house.
like the dessert room at Burns in Tampa.
Yes.
You go up to those barrels. Yeah.
A really bad business plan. Nobody's going to invest in that, but it would be really cool if you felt like you were secure in your little pod and they came to you.
Yeah.
There was actually an article about a restaurant somewhere in, I think, one of the Nordic countries, where by the water, and they had these almost like a little greenhouse that was a two-top that was all glass, and you would dine in there next to the water, and then they'd bring your food over to it. And so if we're looking at this for the next 12 to 18 months or 2 years, maybe architectural designs like that might give people safety. I mean, I was even thinking the other day, if you have to have 6 feet between, why 6 feet of empty space? What if you just like put plants, and there I am dining in this amazing little jungle. It's my happy place. I'd rather have that as a guest than being able to see who's coughing across the room.
Right. But you don't want it to be like a PDR only, because you got to be seen, like for being in the restaurant. So there's got to be an open space for you to see.
Okay.
Dustin needs to be seen. All right. Final question for me. Any words of wisdom you would like to impart on all of us and our listeners here today?
Oh my God. Be well, be safe, talk to your staff every day if you can, at least every week, because without them, y'all are nothing. Like, we're nothing without them. And our biggest mission is to provide their security, because they are going to be the ones that are going to outreach to our guests. So keep talking to them, even if you don't know what you're doing.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks. This was
Thanks,
awesome
June.
conversation.
This is really good. Really good.
Best of luck to everything. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We appreciate you tuning in, and the questions have been great. Please keep them coming, and remember to visit our discussion page and ask any questions, and we do our best to monitor that and share links and respond to your questions. You can also just always reach out to any one of us. Next week, we're going to talk about how do restaurants survive, and we're going to have some pretty frank conversations on, do you even want to reopen? And what's the right business decision? And we talked about a little bit of that today with, reopening in a liability entrenched world, and let's see where that goes. So make sure you subscribe, share this with your friends. It lives on YouTube. And we really appreciate your loyalty and sharing your time with us today. Thanks again, June.
Thanks, June.
Thanks, June. Bye.